I've been watching a lot of news, and the one thing you hear a lot about is cancel culture. A lot of people understand what that is. Cancel culture is the idea of boycotting parts of society or teachings or even people who are deemed to be controversial. You just want to wipe that out. It's the idea of erasing what we don't like. So if you don't like history, let's rewrite history and teach it another way. If you don't like a certain group of people, you're basically going to boycott that group of people or a certain standards of beliefs. You just boycott those and try to erase those from society. The problem with this is the fact that you can't change the world simply because you try to erase what you don't like. You can't just pretend it's not there and it goes away. You know, the whole ignore him and maybe he'll go away. That's a great theory. It doesn't work. You can't just erase something and make it go away. People have differences of opinions. There's a lot of different viewpoints out there in the world. They're not all right, but they're not all wrong either. It's just a lot of different opinions. Trying to cancel culture by eliminating viewpoints that you don't disagree with only provides ammunition for those who disagree with you to do the same thing. So what you're doing is you're creating a never-ending cycle of division. That is all you're doing with the cancel culture idea. Let's cancel culture. Then you've got another group of people that say, we want to cancel that part of culture. You disagree, and what you have in a country is a divided nation. And a house divided against itself cannot stand. It's very destructive. Cancel culture is a bad, bad thing. But there is a way to actually cancel culture. Cancel culture, this whole idea of cancel culture, all it's doing is dividing the country farther. That's all cancel culture is accomplishing. But there is a way that we can actually cancel culture, and it is effective and it is permanent. You can cancel culture. I want to go back to the book of Genesis this morning and look at the story of Abraham and the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. As we know, this was a culture that was completely canceled. We're not going over to Sodom and Gomorrah these days. Nobody can buy tickets to get there. It doesn't exist. It's been wiped out. Completely canceled. But there was a difference of opinion of whether or not it should be canceled. There was, God says we're going to have to cancel this culture. But there was an argument there. There was a difference of opinion in this story of whether or not this society, this culture should be canceled. God chose Abraham to be the father of many nations. He wanted Abraham to know what, and he wanted him to understand why he was doing the things he was doing. He was very close to Abraham. Abraham's actually called the friend of God in the Bible. I would love that title. That's an amazing title where God says, that's my friend. I'm not only his friend, he's my friend. So God wants to communicate with Abraham and keep him up to speed on everything he's doing, but not only the what, but he wants him to know the why. I want you to know why I'm doing the things I'm doing. God had seen the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah, and he has made the decision to remove them from the earth. But he wanted Abraham to understand the reason. God never tries to keep his desires from us, ever. Ever. God doesn't have a list of things he wants to see from our life, and then he says, now I want you to guess what they are. He doesn't do that. God doesn't operate like that. He wants you to know his desires because his desires are in your best interest. So he wants you to know those. So what we have here is we've got a man that is supposed to be the father of many nations. And now God wants to wipe one of those nations out. So Abraham's going to need to know what's going on here. Why are we wiping a nation out, God? Why are we canceling this culture? What's going on here? So he's not trying to hide his desires from Abraham. He wants Abraham to know. Look at verse 17 of Genesis chapter 18. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am doing? Since Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. All the nations of the earth are supposed to be blessed through the line of Abraham. Now God's getting ready to wipe a nation out. This is the promise he gives to Abraham. You are going to be a blessing to all the nations of the world. And then he says, now let's get rid of a nation. Let's wipe a nation out. Abraham is most likely going to have a few questions. Like I thought I was supposed to Yeah, you are. And now you're gonna, I have a couple questions here. It makes sense that he would. I have a concern. So God's taking the time to help him learn and to help him grow. Look at what God says next. This is God in the decision-making process. He's not even talking with Abraham yet. Look at verse 20. And the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grave, I will go down now and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry against it that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Here's a really good question. Did God need to come down and see if everything was as bad as he thought they were? Did God really need to come down and check that out? No. No, he says, I will come down. I will come down and check out the situation for myself and see if it's that bad. If it's that bad, if it's not that bad, I'll know. I'll pick up on it. I'll know. Did he need to come down and check? No, he already knew. He is going to send 2 angels to Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're familiar with the story, God sends 2 angels to Sodom and Gomorrah to help Abraham and his nephew Lot, who lives in Sodom, help them understand why he has to destroy those 2 cities. They need to understand the why. By sending the 2 angels, he's going to expose the wickedness that was already in the heart of the people. They need to know too. So I'm going to come down. He comes down through the 2 angels. The 2 angels go into the city to check things out. But it's not so God can find out how bad it is. It's so Abraham and Lot can see how bad things are. God's also setting the example of not judging something based on what you've heard, but taking the time out to find it yourself. Find out if it's true. Abraham is getting full disclosure and a beautiful lesson in God's wisdom all at the same time. To make a decision before you have valid information is a foolish thing to do. And God is setting the example of how you should move forward. Assumptions get us in trouble all the time. You did this because of this. No, actually I did it because of that. Well, I didn't know that. But now we have a problem because you went ahead and moved on an assumption based on rather than valid information, and we have a problem. And God is saying, before I make this decision, I'm going to set the example of checking it out thoroughly myself. So Abraham is not only getting full disclosure, he's getting an example of wisdom that God is setting up for Abraham's life. God is showing Abraham the character of his own wisdom in the situation. And once he tells Abraham the plan, Abraham has a question and a few suggestions. So now Abraham's getting full disclosure, and Abraham says, okay, I've got something I need to say. Since Abraham's learning about God's character, he decides to ask a question based on that very same character. Look at verse 23. And Abraham came near and said, would you also destroy the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there were 50 righteous within the city. Would you also destroy the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous that were in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing as this, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous should be as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? It looks like Abraham's feeling a little bit invincible at this point. God's telling him that he's about to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah, and Abraham is challenging his decision. Hey, since I'm learning about your character, God, I've got a question about that very same character. Shall not the judge of all the earth do right? If there were 50 righteous people in there, would you really wipe out the 50 righteous with the wicked? I'm just asking you based on your own character. Abraham seems to be a little invincible. Like, yeah, you got some confidence there, buddy. Good job. Good job. So God is trying to help him understand that why he has to wipe out Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham is challenging that decision now. He asked God if grace would be extended for 50 righteous people. Would you extend grace to them? Would God really punish the righteous with the wicked? Is that who you are, God? Is that what you would do? God knows that Abraham is just trying to understand what's happening. He has a heart for the people. He doesn't want to see these cities destroyed. God understands where Abraham's coming from. What has brought Sodom and Gomorrah to this point, God, where you want to cancel that culture? What's going on? I want to understand. Would God really allow it to happen if there were 50 righteous people in the city. Now look at God's answer in verse 26. So the Lord said, if I find in Sodom 50 righteous within the city, then I will spare all the place for their sakes. There you go, Abraham. God's goodness is still intact. It's still intact. There's no reason to question his character any longer. You see that God is good. But Abraham also does not want this culture canceled. So let the bargaining begin. Abraham's like, okay, God would spare it for 50. Okay, I really don't want to see him destroyed. Notice how Abraham's sense of invincibility diminishes here in the conversation. Look at verse 27. Then Abraham answered and said, indeed now, I, who am but dust and ashes, have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose there were 5 less than 50 righteous. Would you destroy all of the city for lack of 5? So he said, if I find 45, I will not destroy it. Abraham's trying to negotiate for the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham's doing everything he can. He wants to see these cities spared. His nephew and Lot live there. His nephew Lot lives in the city. This is where his friends and family are. I have personal ties to these cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. I don't want to see them wiped out. But God knows that the wickedness and the teachings of Sodom and Gomorrah were going to spread if something wasn't done about it. It's a very wicked group of people, and if God doesn't shut it down, it's going to spread. Abraham doesn't want to see these cities destroyed, but God also knows what he has to do, and Abraham knows that God has to do what's right. It's his character. He has to do what's right. So he negotiates things down to 45 righteous people. There are 45 righteous people. Would you please spare it for 45? And God agrees to spare it if he can find 45 righteous people. But Abraham understands how wicked the culture is, so he decides to speak up again. Look at verse 29. And he spoke to him yet again and said, suppose there should be 40 found there. So he said, I will not do it for the sake of 40. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak. Suppose 30 should be found there. So he said, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham just took the number down to 30. If we can only find 30 righteous people, we good to go? And God says, okay, you find 30. I'll spare both cities. You find 30 people. If he can come up with 30 righteous people, God's going to spare both cities in their entirety. Fine, Abraham, if you can find 30. We would normally consider this to be a negotiation victory on Abraham's behalf here. Good job, Abraham. You took it from 50 to 30. But Abraham's not even satisfied with the number. Like, yeah, see, that's a lot of righteous people. I know the culture. 30, I don't know if I can find 30. That's a lot. The culture was about to be canceled by God himself. Sodom and Gomorrah have a serious problem developing. They're about to get wiped out. If Abraham was going to have any chance of saving this culture, he's going to have to do it with a little bit more bargaining. We're down to 30. I'm going to push the envelope a little bit farther. God, I'm just going to try a little bit more. Look at verse 31. And he said, indeed now, I have taken it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 should be found there. So he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 20. Then he said, let not the Lord be angry, and I will speak but once more. Suppose 10 should be found there. And he said, I will not destroy it for the sake of 10. So the Lord went his way as soon as he had finished speaking with Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. In one conversation, Abraham has taken it from 50 down to 10. Good for you, Abraham. If you can find 10 righteous people in the cities, in both cities, combined, if you can find 10 righteous people, God's going to spare the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. God still knew what the outcome was going to be. So he allows Abraham to negotiate for the survival of Sodom and Gomorrah because he needed to see how bad things were himself. You need to see how bad this is, Abraham, so let's go ahead and do the negotiation thing. If you can find 10, I know there's not 10, but if you can find 10, I will spare it. But I know you're not going to find 10 because you're about to see how wicked these cities really are. You're not going to find 10. But yes, I would have spared it if there were 10 righteous. The culture has gotten to the point where God knew that Abraham's not going to find the people he's looking for. You're not going to find 10 righteous. Sodom and Gomorrah were eventually completely destroyed. They were wiped out. Abraham couldn't even find 10 people in both cities. That's a really bad testimony. Can't even find 10 people. Now, at the beginning of the story, God reveals to Abraham that he's going to destroy this culture. I'm going to wipe it out. It's got to go. This means that God has already observed their heart condition and determined its toxicity. This place is detrimental to everyone. This cannot be allowed to continue. It cannot go on. If Sodom and Gomorrah were allowed to remain there, their wickedness and their teaching would affect the nations around them. God says, it's like a cancer. You've got to remove this, otherwise it's going to spread. I've got to remove this, not because I don't love the people, but the people will not turn to me. And I'm not going to risk everybody else by allowing them to continue this way because of my love. I've got to destroy the cities. A lot of people question God's goodness when he has to do something hard, but God never does anything outside of his love. It's because of his love he had to take out Sodom and Gomorrah. The wickedness had to stop, and the people were not willing to do it themselves. What Sodom and Gomorrah did was find out the true recipe for cancel culture. They nailed it. You want to cancel culture? There's something they did to get the whole culture canceled. They figured out the perfect recipe. Cancel culture does not happen by trying to boycott people or beliefs that you find controversial. That just creates division. We see it in our country even today. This whole cancel culture idea is not helping anything. It's making it worse because it's creating more division. It's not fixing anything. That's all that happens. What happens if you want to cancel a culture? It happens when the culture follows the same pattern that Sodom and Gomorrah followed. That's how you cancel a culture. You want to completely wipe out a culture, they figured it out. They knew how to do it. God does reveal the reason why these cities disappeared. And it's not what most people think. Check this out. Ezekiel chapter 16 and verse 49. Look, this was the iniquity of your sister Sodom. She and her daughter had pride, fullness of food, and abundance of idleness. Neither did she strengthen the hand of the poor and needy, and they were haughty and committed abomination before me. Therefore, I took them away as I saw fit. God just showed us the recipe for true cancel culture. You want to cancel culture? They figured it out. They knew how to do it. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah had become arrogant in their way of life. We'll leave that on the screen just for a second here so you can see this. They were blessed and they had plenty. They had plenty. Yet the act of giving wasn't high on their to-do list. The poor and the needy suffered while they were enjoying their blessings. They let the poor and needy just go. I am entitled to everything I have. Let the poor and needy suffer. Then it says they were haughty. They exalted themselves. They lost all humility. And they became people who felt like they were entitled to everything they had. They were arrogant. They had their rights and they felt entitled to the blessings that they enjoyed. That is the abomination of Sodom and Gomorrah. We know other things that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah did, and usually we connect that part of the story to the reason why they had to be destroyed. But God gives us a whole list. You want to know what wiped out their culture? You want to know what took them out? They had so much going for them. I blessed them in such great ways. And taking care of the poor and the needy were not on their list of things to do. They became haughty. They lost humility. They exalted themselves, and they became people who felt like they were entitled to what they had. God saw that the people of Sodom and Gomorrah had become so inwardly focused that they no longer considered God in their lifestyle. God doesn't need to be in our lifestyle. Whatever they felt they wanted to do was acceptable in their eyes. If God said it was wrong, it doesn't matter. We define our own truth. We define our own rules. We do what we want to do. They believed life and reality were whatever they wanted it to be. They were entitled. They were so entitled. God became less and less of a consideration in the minds and the hearts of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. This is the mindset that brought about cultural cancellation. I'm going to wipe them out. I got to take them out. Why was your culture canceled? God gives us a whole list right there. I had to take them out. In the book of Romans, we have another example of what this frame of mind can cause. The results of this mindset that Sodom and Gomorrah had. God's explaining what has happened to those who go into eternity without him. By the way, that's an eye-opener right there when God says, hey, the people that go into eternity without me, I want to explain what happened there. Absolutely. I want to know too. Please tell me what happened. There is one ingredient in his description that may come as a surprise to the people that go off into eternity without him. Look at Romans chapter 1 and verse 18. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness. Because what may be known of God is manifest in them, for God has shown it to them. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. This passage is explaining why these people have no excuse if they choose to reject the reality of God and his message of salvation. Nature itself declares that God exists. We're going to have a really hard time finding out where the manufacturing plant is that created the planets and the moon and the stars. You don't manufacture that. You must have a creator. Even nature itself declares that there is a God. There is a God. And this same God has revealed himself and has offered salvation to them, but they choose to suppress the truth instead. You know the truth. It's right in front of you. I'm here. You know I'm here. But you suppress the truth. You don't want to believe in this. But it doesn't mean you don't know that I'm here. God has blessed them with rain, with sunshine, gravity. I'm thankful for that one. I'm really thankful for gravity. And by the way, the just and the unjust enjoy it equally. Gravity is kind of a big blessing that we have. Oxygen, food, health, they get all those things too. And this God poured out his goodness on those people just like he poured out his goodness on us. The evidence is there. You've got the blessings. I've given it all to you. God has blessed them with so much, and they just assume they were entitled to these things. I deserve it. How did you get to that point? How did you get to that point where you are entitled to these things? These people have become so desensitized to the things of God. I will suppress the truth. I see there must be a God, but I will not. I will not submit to that. That's where these people are at. Their minds are wrapped up in the temporal pleasures of life. They have created within themselves the same cultural mindset that Sodom and Gomorrah had. I am entitled. The blessings I have in my life are mine. I deserve them. It's just as it should be. I'm entitled. And even though they know that God is there, they choose to suppress the truth. Why do they do this? Why do they do this? The answer is in the next verse. Romans 1:21. Because although they knew God, they did not glorify him as God, nor were thankful, but became futile in their thoughts, and their foolish hearts were darkened. The lack of thanksgiving is the recipe for cancel culture. Lock it in. This is Thanksgiving week. We're about to celebrate the holiday of Thanksgiving. You want to cancel a culture? Unthankfulness will do that for you. It will wipe you out. This is the time of year where we stop and give a shout out to God. This is that time. Thursday comes and we're like, oh yeah, this is the time where we shout out to God and say, oh, by the way, thank you. We take that one moment in our life or our one moment in that year and we say, and by the way, thank you for everything. And then we eat till we hurt. And then we realize there's still dessert. We didn't know there was dessert. And then we're like, okay, we can push this pain level a little farther. We can eat a little bit more. And then we have to sit down and take a nap, take a break. And then we get up and wander, and then we're just grazing, throughout the rest of the day. That's what we end up doing on Thanksgiving. We're all familiar with the holiday. We know what happens. You go visit family and friends. We understand the holiday. But in the middle of that holiday somewhere, we stop and we just go, oh, and by the way, thanks. Thanks. A lot of people misunderstand what Thanksgiving really is. We enjoy the holiday, and I enjoy the holiday. I really do. But if we think it's just a holiday, then we missed out on what Thanksgiving's really all about. We can say thank you and not be thankful. Did you know you can do that? You can say thank you and not be thankful. And maybe you've done it. Maybe, I don't know, somebody spills a little drink on you and you're like, oh, thanks a lot. Now, did you say thanks? Yes. Are you thankful? No. You can say thanks and not be thankful. It's possible to do. You can even give and not be thankful. And I've got 3 letters to prove it. IRS. Have you ever given and not be thankful? No, I don't know. You can say thanks and not be thankful, and you can give and not be thankful. We don't exactly rejoice when we have the opportunity to give to the IRS. Now, one of us are like, oh, good, it's that time of year. We can bless the IRS with our hard-earned money. I look forward to that day. Not one of us do. We can give and not be thankful. So if Thanksgiving is not the idea of saying thanks, and it's also not the idea of giving, then what is it? Thanksgiving, we say thanks and we give, and that should be Thanksgiving. That's not what Thanksgiving is, because you can do both of those things without being thankful at all. You don't have to be thankful at all to say thanks or to give. So what is it? And this is going to sound like I'm just repeating myself here. It's the act of being thankful. And it does sound like the same thing, but it's so much more. It's not saying thanks. It's not just giving. It's the act of being thankful. And that takes a greater definition than the other two do. Thankfulness has the power to save a culture from being canceled. There's a lot there. It can reverse cancel culture. Thankfulness is less focused on what we have and more focused on where we got it from. I can be thankful for a gift because I really enjoy the gift. And when I say thank you, it's because I really enjoy the gift. Thankfulness isn't focused on this. It's focused on the one that gave it to me. It goes farther than the gift. Thankfulness is different than saying thanks. It extends farther than the thing that you have. It brings us to the point where we're happy to give because we're so thankful for the goodness of God, and we have to share it because we're so focused on the giver and less on the gift. That's thankfulness. Did you know that there was an offering in the book of Leviticus that was never required? This is fascinating. You've got all the laws in Leviticus, all the laws laid out for us, and there are certain sacrifices. You have a trespass sacrifice, and you've got, I don't know, a bunch more. Okay, there's a bunch of sacrifices, but all these laws are given. There is one offering, one sacrifice mentioned in the book of Leviticus that is not required by anybody to do. God gave the law and then says nobody's required to do it. That's fascinating. Why even give the law? Why tell us about it if nobody is required to perform it? That's an interesting sacrifice. It was called the offering of Todah, which means thanks. It's a thanksgiving offering, and nobody is required to give it. If the sacrifice was going to be offered, it was going to be offered out of pure free will. It is not a requirement. If you're going to do it, it's not because you had to. It's because you were thankful. You don't have to do this at all. But some people did do it. They performed this sacrifice. The person would bring a lamb to be offered. And that is around 100 to 200 pounds of meat, by the way, because when we say lamb, it's up to a year old. Those little guys grow quick. And that's a lot of lamb right there, okay? So we're talking 100 to 200 pounds of meat. Now lock that little piece of information into your head right there. They would sacrifice the lamb to the Lord, and then they had one more instruction to follow. Remember, they don't have to do this at all. But if they're thankful, they will bring this lamb in, and they will have this lamb sacrificed. And then they have to follow one more instruction. Leviticus chapter 7 and verse 15. The flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day it is offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. Somewhere between 100 and 200 pounds of meat have to be eaten by the next day. Now that's a Thanksgiving feast. I don't think I've ever been able to come close to pushing this limit. That is a lot to consume. And you can't leave any of it to the next day. That requires one other thing. You have got to share the blessing. You are now locked into not only saying thank you to God, but extending the blessing to others in order to fulfill this sacrifice. That is an amazing sacrifice. And it's not required by anybody to do. But if you're going to do it, it's the whole picture of Thanksgiving in one sacrifice. Why are you doing it? Free will. Free will. You know you got to eat all that by morning, right? Yeah. Appetite doing good? Not that big. It's not that big. What are you going to do? I have to share the blessing. I have to pour the goodness of God out to other people. Strangers, help. There's a free meal here for you. Just come on in and enjoy the blessings of God. Let me share this with you. Because of God's goodness, someone would bring an unrequired offering of thanks to God. And that offering would end up being a blessing to others. Unrequired, given out of thankfulness, and poured out to other people. That's a really beautiful picture of what Thanksgiving is. I've got a little bit of bragging to do, not about myself, so we're good there. I've got bragging to do right now. This past week, several of our church members sacrificed their time and their hard work to help Stacy turn 39 live turkeys into Thanksgiving dinners for people. That happened this past week. It's a messy job and it took a lot of effort. One of those people just turned 90 2 weeks ago. I don't know how you feel about that thought right there, but that's amazing. That's amazing. Stacy had a need and these people had the time and the ability to help. And even if they didn't have the time, they sacrificed it to help. They gave of themselves to do this. Another couple of our church this week purchased several turkeys from the store to give to people in need for Thanksgiving. They spent their personal money and went and bought several turkeys from the store and brought them to the church and said, can we bless 5 people? Can we just be a blessing this year to 5 people who could just use a little blessing? Just, can we push this a little farther? So they spent their own money and brought those in to be a blessing to 5 families in need. They gave of themselves and they were not obligated to do it. Both of these groups, They gave of themselves and they were not obligated to do it at all. They could have said, I'm entitled to a little relaxation. I'm entitled to my own money and I'm entitled to my own time. I've been working, I've been on my feet all week. I'm entitled to a little relaxation. But they gave sacrificially instead. In the past, I've heard each one of these people mention how our church reflects the goodness of God, and then they showed up this week and made it happen again. My week has been packed. This week has been stacked against me. I've been spread out as thin as I could be spread out this week. I couldn't be there. I did not call anybody and say, hey, could you help? That was being taken care of without my involvement at all. I just needed to take a minute to brag on our church. A lot of times a pastor has to delegate and set up things and get things moving. But in this church, it's a little different. I still get to do my job, but there's gaps out there that I just can't reach out to fill. And you all run everywhere to make sure it's taken care of. Thank you. Renew, thank you for being this body of believers God has put together. Thank you for all that you do all the time. I really am thankful as your pastor. Thank you so much for chasing him. Thank you so much. You could have all said, I'm entitled. I'm entitled to relaxation. I'm entitled to my time. I'm entitled to my money. But instead you showed up and made it happen all over again. The goodness of God has been shared. Somebody else got blessed. You gave out of your love for God, and you were a blessing to others because you wanted to reflect God's love to others. Thank you for doing that. This is what our nation needs to see. This is the stuff that cancels cancel culture. It flips the whole thing around. You try to cancel culture all you want to. It doesn't work by creating division. You want to repair a culture, it's done through thanksgiving. God, I'm going to sacrifice because of your sacrifice, because of how good you are to me. I'm going to offer a sacrifice. You need to spread that out. There's way too much there. Then I need to bless other people. I need to spread this out and be a blessing to others too. That is what you did this past week. This is the stuff that cancels cancel culture. That's how to fix it. In the book of 2 Timothy, God gives us a glimpse of what things are going to look like in the last days. Let's look at this glimpse. By the way, just because society goes this way doesn't mean individuals have to go this way. So let's look at this glimpse of what the last days will look like. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1. But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come. For men will be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy. The mindset of entitlement is a dangerous thing. Are you thankful or are you entitled? Entitlement will destroy. Unthankfulness will cancel culture. Thankfulness will build and repair culture. Unthankfulness happens to be the main ingredient to true cancel culture. So if anybody says, hey, I believe in cancel culture, so you're not very thankful. Because that's the only way you're going to get that accomplished, is the lack of thankfulness. When we understand that we are not entitled to everything we have, but instead we are blessed with everything that we have, we turn our attention to the blesser rather than the blessing. I'm not entitled, I am blessed. Therefore, my focus is not on the gift, it's on the giver. Thanksgiving is the act of living out thankfulness, a life of thankfulness. That's what Thanksgiving is. And if we're living a life of thankfulness, we're already focused on the one we are thanking. That's what thankfulness is. It's not the blessing that we're focused on, it's the blesser. We're thankful for him. That's what we're thankful for. The blessings are just the perks from his own character. That we are blessed because of who he is. That will save culture. That will save a culture. I am thankful that our country takes time out in November for the holiday of Thanksgiving. They are even trying to cancel that. what Thanksgiving's all about. So I encourage every one of you this week, live it up. Let's be thankful. Not just say thanks, because everybody can understand we can do that without being thankful. And it's not just about giving, because you can do that without being thankful too. Thankfulness focuses less on the gift and more on the giver. That's when we say, I have a sacrifice of thanksgiving, God. It's not required. I have to offer it to you. And God says, if you're going to do that, you're going to need to spread that love out, because what I have provided for you is more than you can bear yourself. You're going to need to spread that love to other people if you're going to show true thankfulness. Other people's lives are going to be impacted by that right there. Are you ready to make the sacrifice? Are you sure you want to make this sacrifice? It's not required. But if you truly want to offer a sacrifice of thanksgiving, that means there's a lot of people out there that are going to be blessed by the goodness of God because of your thanksgiving. That is what Thanksgiving is. So have a good Thanksgiving. Enjoy the Thanksgiving holiday this week. Enjoy it, but let's do it right. Let's do it right.